Awesome. Welcome to Metagov Seminar. Today we have Daniel Kronovet, who's going to give us an overview of his work with the Chore Wheel and invite us into some new fun applications of the Chore Wheel in the Metagov space. So, Daniel, take it away.
Thank you, Val. So happy to be here. Yeah, so I'm pretty amped for this week's seminar because it's going to be, less of a presentation and more of a invitation to interact. I'm going to be presenting a project I've been working on for many years, Chore Wheel, and I've spoken. Some of you were here at the seminar twice about it. Chore Wheel was initially designed for co-living houses as a way to help a group of people kind of in a decentralized way organize essentially their care work and the regenerative labor that it takes to run a house. The idea was that, a lot of these boring tasks no one wants to do, no one does, and so the communities end up sort of falling apart. And if there was a way to organize it so that the burden didn't fall on one person but could be shared easily among many people, it'd be easier to keep a house going. So that's Chore Wheel. For those of you who don't know, I actually started a co-living house, like a physical co-living house in Los Angeles called Sage House, which was the first group to use Chore Wheel, and they've been using it for 3 years, and it's going pretty well. We published a research paper about it, which I've also sort of discussed in this group, which I will post a link in the chat if you want a little bit more kind of theory about it. But at this point, I think this project has gotten fairly mature. And the next kind of big step was to try it out in the Metagov Slack. And the idea was, this was designed for a physical community, but ultimately it's a digital tool. So maybe we can use it to help supercharge a digital community as well. And so this is going to be less of a presentation and more of an actual tour of the usage of Chore Wheel in the actual Metagov Slack. So I'm going to share my screen, but if all of you want to just in the actual Metagov Slack, go to the Jungle Gym channel, you can basically follow along at right along at home. So I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna talk about and show you Chore Wheel in the Metagov Slack. I'll invite you to participate if you want, and ideally we can just kick off, an ongoing community sustaining process, all of us together. So that's basically that. Any questions before I kind of do an overview of the actual tool live, or should I just kick it off? Okay, well,
Just one
let's
more time, what's the name of the channel in Slack?
Jungle Gym.
Jungle Gym.
I'm not seeing the channel.
We're gonna see it all right now. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share specifically Slack. There it is. Okay. So everyone sees me sharing my Slack. All right. So here we are, the Metagov Slack that we all know and love. All the normal channels. And look at that. What's that right over here? Wow, the Jungle Gym channel. Everyone, check it out. You can follow right along live. So this is the channel Jungle Gym. It's just a Slack channel, innocuous like any other, but this channel has a little bit of a secret. There's something more going on here. What's this? Chores? What else do we have? Hearts? I don't know what's going on. Why don't we click on the Chores app? Oh, go to app. Oh ho ho ho. What's this? Here we have on the side, we see the kind of apps, the apps list, right next to our favorite koi, we have Chores and Hearts. We go to Chores and look at that. It's a whole new game-like experience that we can IRL participate in. The game world and the real world have become one and the same. So I'll do a quick overview. Welcome to Chores. We kind of go down. We see, oh, I've earned 125 of 103 points this month. What does that mean? I'll tell you. There are 8 people around today. What does that mean? I'll tell you. Events will be posted in Jungle Gym. That one you should probably be able to figure out. And then we have got a couple buttons. Let's go to claim a chore. Claim a chore. Oh, look at that. A bunch of chores. They're worth points. Amplify Metagov socials, 87 points. That's a lot. Other ones worth less. Da, 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 da. I think for those of you who are just joining, if you've never, you have to opt into the Chores app. So you might just have seen click to activate yourself. And if that's what you see, then, if you want to participate in this Chores system to help make the Metagov Slack super amazing, activate yourself. If you're not ready to do so and you just kind of want to observe, then, don't, but you're not going to be able to have as much fun as we're having. So the
Also, just
basic,
realize I want to make sure everyone is in Metagov Slack in general. Most of you I know are, but just in case you're not in the Metagov Slack, I just posted a link in the Zoom chat so you can join us there. Um, yeah, just wanted to make sure.
so I guess the basic idea behind the Chores app is that there are a lot of things that we want to do to sustain a community. We call this, care work. We might call this regenerative labor. It's the kind of tasks that, aren't just one and done, but we have to do over and over again. I think the iconic example is doing the dishes, right? There's this great quote by Dorothy Day, who was a famous labor activist, and she said, "Everybody wants a revolution. Nobody wants to do the dishes." And so figuring out a way to divide this necessary work that no one really wants to do in a way that it gets done without feeling like a burden was the real sort of task that this project was meant to solve. And so the way that we go about it was, we didn't want there to be a schedule. People talk a lot about bragging boards, which are totally opt-in. We felt like that was a little bit unreliable. In our case, we didn't want to hire staff to do these tasks, both for cost reasons and for values reasons. We wanted the community itself to do this work. And we didn't really want one person to be in charge because that ends up being a kind of thankless task and ultimately a lot of strain on that person. And I think that a big goal was, avoid making any one person the kind of psychological scapegoat, but really divide the work amongst everyone using a tool that is seen as neutral and legitimate in the eyes of the participants. That was the idea. And the way that we went about doing that was by saying, okay, if you participate in this chore system, then you owe 100 points of chores every month. The reason why it's 102 is a reason I'll explain momentarily, but everyone owes 100 points per month of chores. And you earn chores, or you earn points by doing chores. As we saw, you go to claim a chore, and you say, oh, like these are the different chores that are available. You might be asking, why is Amplify Metagov Socials worth so many points and everything else is worth so few points? Such a great question. The answer is the kind of key dynamic that drives the chore system that lets it work in a sort of unmanaged way is that the value of a chore goes up the longer it's been since someone did it. So if you look at the Jungle Gym channel, you'll see that all the point values that everyone has seem to be not quite random, but they're different, right? Natalia shared something positive for 50 points. Ian responded to a post in peer review, actually my post, for 47 points. You might be saying, what are these? I responded to a post in peer review for 103 points. You might be saying, what's this about? Well, the idea is that there is no, schedule for doing a chore. People do chores whenever they want to get to 100 points per month. But the longer it's been since a chore was done, the more points it's going to be worth. And oh, look at that. So it seems like a chore is missing. What? Hey, look at that. Elrion, do you want to chime in about what just happened? Do you want to tell us a little about what you just did?
Well, so I still need to submit my proof, but I am adding the Metagov Twitter and stuff. If y'all have an X, I actually forgot, but I just claimed the chore. Thought I'd be the first to do so and grab that 87 points.
Tell us more about your thought process and what's going through your head right now.
Number go up. Um, um, yeah, I mean it's a bit of the FOMO side of things, but more on like a positive spin, right? Like seems like it was something that doesn't take too much out of my day, but it'll make it so I can help the community and you know, get my chores over with.
Exactly right. And I really appreciate that. And I think that, the idea behind the chores whole system is that, nothing is that hard. We just need everyone to kind of do a little bit of it. And we want everyone to do it on a somewhat regular basis. But we also want them to use their own judgment about when and how to do what. And so the idea is that, every chore, and I think over time, chores will end up, it'll become sort of known what a chore is meant to be worth. In the early stages, when people are figuring it out, the values might seem like they really fluctuate. But I think over time, we'll say, you know what, 87 points is actually kind of a lot for that chore. Maybe next time when it's 40 points, I'll do it. Maybe people start to say, you know what, I could do it when it was 30 points, because what ends up happening is that without a person kind of making these decisions explicitly, the whole community ends up kind of organically realizing what fairness looks like. Because everyone wants to get 100 points. Everyone wants to get 100 points relatively easily. No one wants to be doing extra work. And so it might be that someone else in a couple of days says, you know what, I need to get 30 points. I could amplify Metagov socials in 90 seconds. I'm going to claim it at 30 points instead of letting it get up to 87, which I would say maybe is overvalued. And so over time, the whole community kind of aggregates around fairness, and we end up kind of just doing the work that needs to be done in a way that feels very dialed in.
Do chores set to 0? And do they
Yeah.
all increase at the same rate?
So the first answer to your first question is yes, Steve. The answer to your second question is no. Right. So now we go back to the chores, and now respond to a post to peer review is worth 19 points. Share something positive is worth 9 points, yeah, so on and so forth. And I would say right now, these chores are actually not very valuable because people have already done stuff recently. So right now, you could say we're in a bit of a cool down phase where we're going to now wait maybe 1 or 2 or 3 days. People who haven't earned all their points yet are going to come back. I having 125 points, I'm done for the month. I don't need to, this is no longer my problem. I'm basically out. I can go live my life. Other people who maybe haven't contributed anything yet, they have to get some more points this month. So they're gonna have to come back and say, okay, let me see what is available, claim a chore, and they're gonna, find some way to contribute, and they're gonna have to get their 100 points somehow. And really, what you want is the more often that you are checking, the more likely you'll be able to do chores that are, in your opinion, highly valued. If you sort of wait till the last minute, you might find that there really there's nothing left for you to do. And then you might have to do more work to get 100 points, or maybe even not get 100 points at all, in which case there'll be a sort of consequence. I'm going to kind of show one more thing, and then Steve, I'll get to your question. So you might be asking, what does long-term accountability look like? What happens if you don't get 100 points in a month? What happens if you get extra? What is this, what are we doing here? The answer is the Hearts app, which is the second complementary piece of the puzzle. Hearts is basically you can think of it as a reputation system. You can think of it as a life bar. I drew very explicitly on the kind of gaming vernacular, the idea of hearts. You can see, this is the whole Slack community's like hearts board. We can see, how is everyone doing not in their once a month contributions, but in their longer term contributions. So over multiple months, as people do chores or don't do chores, they will gain or lose hearts. If they run out of hearts, then they are basically kicked out of the program for not participating. If they gain extra hearts, then we might give them additional benefits and bonuses. I think it's really up to us to decide how to operationalize this idea. But the idea of like a longer term sort of accounting is what Hearts is meant to do. And I know that now everything is still kind of getting shaken out. And so, maybe people weren't doing anything, or last month no one really participated. So it's fine. I think you can actually see, if you go up to the Slack, what happened at the end of last month. Let's go. Yeah. So every month, the app will basically post a kind of summary of the month before. And we can see, some people didn't participate at all because this is all very new. Some people did a lot, but every month we'll sort of see who's doing more chores, who's doing less chores, and the longer term accountability ends up being sort of captured in the heart system. So we have, kind of permissionless participation, very dynamic, sort of market-based allocating of who's doing what. We have longer term accounting through the heart system, and kind of end to end, we have a system where everyone participates on their terms. No one is really in charge. No one has to do the management work, but we still get flexibility. We still get accountability. We still get fairness over a longer period of time. So that's kind of the overall concept. I'm gonna go over a few more features of the Chores app and the Hearts app, and then I'll open it up for questions. Are there any questions at this point in time, or should I continue with the exposition? Yeah.
I have
So
a
I'm
quick,
assuming the
oh,
oh, sorry. The
no, go
the
for it.
upvotes on the thing are just to confirm that like the chore has been done, right? Like to like a verification.
You're saying the thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
just did
exactly.
the three pieces. I did the
No.
three.
And there and now I've just given you a thumbs up. So yeah, so the part of the our slogan during development was no managers, no meetings. And the kind of like no manager kind of distributed decision making ethos was really core. And so, if people are going to be claiming chores, there has to be some way to embed that claim in some kind of peer judgment. And so, anyone can kind of say, I did something. And to prevent someone from outright lying, there had to be some way for the rest of the community to basically endorse or challenge that claim. And so this is what it looks like. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very rare for anyone to give a thumbs down. I think, at Sage House, the co-living house, we had one person who like would lie about their chores. And so they were the only person who ever really got thumbs down. Yeah, I mean, we actually had to ask that person to leave. And I would say something I'll say is that, people a lot of people like raise their eyebrows at this whole system. But when you're operating in a highly regulated rental market like Los Angeles, where it's very difficult to make anyone leave, it turns out that this worked really well. And I think the scenario where, I talk to a lot of people in the intentional community world, and a fair amount of them are very skeptical of why any of this is necessary. I think a lot of them are very vibes oriented. And it's like one of those things that works until it doesn't. And then when you have someone who refuses to leave and you realize that you're in a rent control district and you actually can't make anyone leave, um, then they're like, oh wow, this is when structures really would have been helpful. And I'm like, well, that's right. So yeah, I mean, sometimes people who want to be very vibes forward will say, what's the point of this? And the answer is the point of it is when you have a real problem and you need some structure, and then you're gonna wish you had it. So that's kind of what I have to say about that. But yeah, we actually, we were able to convince someone to leave. I would say someone who really didn't want to go. We were able to convince them to leave. I would say very pleasantly. In not that much time because we had this sort of apparatus, under the hood. Whereas in other cases, someone could refuse to
I
leave
mean, you
and like
just had a sheer preponderance of evidence that was just like, and you did this and this, and they couldn't
exactly. So
argue with any of it. Right. Okay.
it was a mixture of like an audit log. It was a mixture of financial penalties. It was also a mixture of just everyone being on the same page, versus having to have ambiguity that someone could then use to exploit. I think all of those things together made it very easy to ask someone to leave. When in another case that could have turned into like a huge nightmare scenario. So I think that is something I'm not obviously proud that someone was asked to leave. That's not what I want, but I was sort of I noted that the process in my mind went actually relatively smoothly. Okay, so I'm just gonna go over some of
I
the
had a quick
features of
question, Daniel.
so,
Just on if if you do extra chores one month or something, then like does that roll over at all to the next or probably
so
not, right?
great question. No, the chore points were really meant to be very ephemeral. And so they really only exist within a single month. And, we built it around the idea of these epochs. There's an epoch around which everything occurs. Like you have 1 month to do your chores. And the idea was to give people flexibility. Like maybe you want to wait till the end, maybe you want to do all your chores at the beginning, like to allow people to have many strategies for, what they wanted to do within the epoch of, every month. That's kind of the unit that we care about. And then in the next epoch, we reset back to zero. And yeah, I mean, I've heard people say, I've gotten feedback about, can you have points roll over? If people don't do all their points, maybe that those get added to their next month's total. Like I've had many suggestions about how to do continuity from month to month. I think the position I've always taken is that's what hearts are for. Hearts capture the sort of longer term continuity. And so I don't want to overcomplicate the chore system just yet. I would say that, if we make it to like dozens of houses using it and we start to get a lot more data about use cases, I think at that point it would be worth exploring, adding maybe more layers of complexity. But I've been pretty resistant to adding those things in just yet. until I'm very convinced, until I really understand what the feature is. I think I would want a lot of clarity about what exactly we would be doing before we made a change like that, because it would add a lot of complexity. And I would say, I think one thing I've been happy about was that these systems have been pretty robust in practice. I think there have been little scenarios where they didn't work perfectly, but they've never really broken down. And I think that's partially because they were kept pretty simple, and pretty intuitive from the start. So yeah, I think that at this point, I want to keep the complexity pretty low, until there's a compelling reason to add more complexity. Has been my approach as like a, project lead. Okay, so I just want to quickly go over the rest of the features, and then we'll do a Q&A. So we've already seen claiming a chore. Claiming a chore is the main kind of interaction that everyone does. You could really live in a house and never interact with a single other feature. So there's like the one required loop, so to speak, is claiming a chore. So you come to the app, you see how many points you need, you claim a chore, you see what's available, you do the chore, and at minimum, that's all that anyone needs to do. The other features allow for obviously more nuance. So the first one is you can take a break. So if you are going, and this was designed for a physical house, say you're going out of town for 2 weeks. If you're not living in the house, you're not contributing to the mess. And so you shouldn't be responsible for cleaning up the mess. And that way also, if you're going out of town, you're not coming back and you have to scramble to get 100 points of chores. So you can basically say, I'm going out of town, and then you'll owe fewer chores for the month, for the time you're gone. So if you're gone for 2 weeks out of a 4-week month, you only owe 50 points that month. And so it's a way to scale your obligation to your actual, I would say towards your impact. So that's taking a break. If you have extra points, or if you just have points at all, you can gift your points. For example, I'll say, giving Val 10 points, running a great seminar. We submit. Boom, Val's got 10 points. I have 10 fewer points. And that's kind of that. And so, we can, by having a point system, we actually allow for like a whole kind of secondary economy to emerge, where people who have extra points can basically say, I'm gonna give out 10 points for some tasks. So what this actually allows pretty organically is for people with more points to basically define their own tasks, saying, look, if anyone needs points, if someone wants to, if someone wants to reorganize the free pile, I'll give them 20 points for it. Or like, hey, everyone, like someone says, hey, like I just did a task, does anyone want to give me some points? So there's earning the points originally through the like automatic, point increasing system that's built in. But once people have earned some points, there's a whole secondary layer of like re-point giving that can emerge organically based on whatever the people want. So that's something that I think is neat. Also, if people don't want to do that, they don't have to. It's also, if people want to split a chore, they can split a chore using that. So like gifting points actually allows for a lot more complexity to emerge, right on top without any real additional like code complexity. So I think that was cool. Okay, to your question, I'm just going to finish my exposition and then we'll get to your question. So adding a special chore, this is something that actually I added only recently. So initially everything was just you make a chore and then they all kind of repeat. And the idea is that every chore is a repeating task. But something that I heard a lot was that, sometimes we want to do a one-off task, like reorganizing the closet or reorganizing the library, or some big task that is really not a recurring task, but is like a one-off. And so you can say, look, I want to add a chore. You say, I want it to be worth so-and-so points. And this actually kind of is a different paradigm from the ongoing auction of the recurring chores, where the value keeps going up until someone claims it. With a special chore, you define in advance how many points it's worth, and then the number doesn't really change. Someone has to do it. And this is also why I owe 102 points, because if you create a special chore, and I'll show you in the Jungle Gym channel what it looks like, those extra points get added to everyone's requirements. And the kind of reason why that's the case, so right here. Lee created the special chore, be a Metagov navigator, and that added, 2-3 points to everyone's requirement, because it was more points. And the kind of the core kind of what's the term I'm looking for? Invariant to the whole chore point economy is that the amount of points that are created and the amount of points that are owed are the same, right? So points entering the system and points leaving the system are the same. And so we always end up in kind of a steady state of points being created and points being consumed. So the overall, points economy doesn't really inflate. You don't want to be in a situation where everything is worth 500 points and people do one chore for 5 minutes and then they're done for the month, but then things aren't being done. There was a bug maybe 6 or 9 months into the house being open where I actually was overproducing points because I was not calculating breaks correctly. There was a bug in my SQL code. And so we were producing points much more quickly than people owed. And so people would get all their points like the second week of the month. And then we were like, well, we all have 100 points. It's like the 15th. No one's doing any more chores because we all have 100 points, but things still need to get done and things are still worth points, and actually caused like a little bit of a crisis. So obviously this is not as complicated as the real macroeconomy, but there is a small points economy that does have to stay balanced. It's very real. And I think I think actually quite interesting to see the way that points inflation meaningfully stressed people out because they were like, we don't know what to do. We all have 100 points, but like things need to be done and we just don't know what to do anymore. So people give me a lot of crap about whether this whole thing is necessary, but I will say, like, when the points economy was inflated, people did not appreciate it. So that was interesting. Two more features. So I'm going to skip to edit chores list. So this is more if you want to change a chore that goes into the recurring chore process. If you want to add a new chore for ongoing use, you do this. If you want to change an existing chore, let's say I want to edit. Let's say I want to respond to a post in peer review. Let's see. Can be in other channels. All right, so let's say we actually want to be able to review something in any channel, not just in peer review, because people post interesting things all over the Discord. Now we're in Jungle Gym and I say, hey, I would like to edit the chore. So edits have a higher upvote threshold because it's a bigger change. And so more people have to approve the change for it to go into effect. A big design sort of tool throughout the whole Chore Wheel stack was the idea of adaptive upvotes. So there's no idea of a quorum. The idea that we need a certain amount of people to participate doesn't exist. Instead of a quorum, we have the idea of an upvote threshold, where it's not, we need a certain number of votes in total. We need a certain number of upvotes for a vote to pass. And that's something that's sort of provided by the system. So the idea is that it's not yes versus no. The idea is that people really rarely downvote things ever. So framing things more as, are we crossing a threshold of upvotes versus the status quo actually ended up being a much more useful framing overall. So it's every vote has a certain upvote threshold and you have to clear it. If you don't clear it, then the vote automatically fails. And so no one ever really downvotes things. It's always just getting enough upvotes to clear the threshold. So, we'll see if this we'll see if this proposal passes. I don't really know if it will. And the last thing, then see if this gets to your point. So another feature that I was quite proud of was the idea of setting chore priorities. The idea is that not every task needs to be done the same. Some of them are much more important than others. The classic case is dishes need to be done much more often than other chores. So we could say, so we allow people to prioritize or deprioritize different tasks. So let's say, I want to prioritize sharing something positive because I think that more positivity is going to be a good thing. I want more people to be sharing positive things. I want this chore to be done more often by the people in the Metagov community. And let's say I want to prioritize it by a small amount because I think it's doing fine, but I want a little bit more positivity in the Slack. I would say, okay, so I want to prioritize share something positive by a little bit. So then I have to say, what do I want to deprioritize? Ultimately, the amount of points is fixed. And so we can basically allocate almost like a river, where do we want to put more resources? And these are always framed as relative choices. So let's say I want to prioritize share something positive and I want to deprioritize update song in the day and amplify Metagov socials because I think that those are done often enough. I go to next. And now we say, okay, so after this update, share something positive will have a priority of 344. And this is basically, percentages times 10. So out of 1,000, because just cleaner than out of 100. but we're going to share the priority of share something positive so that, really 34%, of all the points now are going to go to this chore. And the nice thing is that this is a change that I can make unilaterally. So everyone can basically update their own priorities as they see fit. And the chore system as a whole will reflect that. So this is a way to really aggregate individual people's preferences without needing to have a synchronous meeting process. So that was the big idea, was how do we do collective decision making without a synchronous decision process? And this was basically how we approached it. So I'm going to basically increase the priority of this task. Now, if you go to Jungle Gym, you see that I anonymized it because I didn't want people to feel like their preferences had to be public. But now, share something positive is going to gain, I would say, about twice as many points per day as it did before. And this is not something that's going to go into effect immediately. If you go to claim a chore, it's not going to immediately be worth more points. But over time, every hour, every couple of hours, as chores accumulate points, you'll see that share something positive will accumulate points more quickly. And then if down the road we say, you know what, we actually want to prioritize, respond to a post in peer review because that one's really important. I want to prioritize this a lot. I want to prioritize it more so than share something positive, right? Because we're always saying, what is the trade-off going to be, right? If I want more peer review responses, what is it that I'm willing to trade off against? In this case, I want to trade off against share something positive. And now it's going to be another increase, an increase of also 147 points per thousand. And that's going to be another change. I'm going to submit that change. And now we have respond to post and peer review is now even more important. And if we go back to chores, we'll see that the priorities of all the chores now have really changed a lot, where right now responding to a post and peer review is almost half of all the points. Share something positive is about a quarter. And Song of the Day and Amplify Socials are at about 10, 15% of all the points. And other people, based on their own preferences, what they want to see in the Slack, can make their own changes. And over time, as more people kind of make their relative preference changes, we're going to converge onto a pretty stable set of priorities that will remain more and more consistent the more people put in their inputs, right? When there's only one person making inputs, the changes are going to be wider. As more people contribute their priorities, then the allocation will stabilize because there'll be, when we think of the graph, there'll be more edges on the graph. And so the graph will become more stable. That's maybe more of an advanced topic for another day. That's the idea. Yeah, so I think that was basically it. Adrian, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Okay. One thing that I was really curious about, and my initial intuition on the special chores was that it was kind of more of a bounty system, such that like akin to the gifting your chores, you can like put a chore up and like spend your points to request somebody else to do something. Um, I feel like currently the special chore as it is good, but potentially a little overcomplicating things. I was a little confused as to like, so it like down regulates the points needed, and like that there's like a decent amount of like economic fluctuation that occurs through that. But I think a more direct way, or just an additional feature that I would really enjoy, would be a way to like spend my points on a request, if that almost makes sense. Like, because through the gifting system, I believe it was like alluded to that would be a use case of the gifting system, but I would like an autonomous, like to be able to have it so it's like my points get immediately spent, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that that's a good point. I could go into kind of why this was done the way that it was. I mean, I think that
I'm
the reason
curious. Yeah.
why, yeah, so the reason why this was done this way was because, you know, I guess like the idea of creating basically creating almost like a donation bin of like I want to propose a chore and people can donate their points into the chore and then that bounty will increase. Um, it was just basically another whole logical branch that didn't already exist. Whereas, once I had infrastructure for doing proposals and I had infrastructure for having chores, adding a special chore as a proposal to create a chore, just it basically was something that could be done more directly given the structure I already had versus creating like a lot of new concepts. That was it. And also I think that the idea was that when you create a special chore in this way, the burden is like pretty equally shared among all the residents. So we're basically voting to increase all of our requirement by a small amount to share that burden equally, versus, maybe having it be like a donation thing. Yeah, so those are some thoughts. One thing that I sort of left as like an open question was to what extent participants would develop their own systems. Like your point of, what if we had a kind of a, there's nothing stopping anyone from saying, like, I want to do a chore. Can people commit to gifting points? And someone says in the Slack, like, hey, what would people gift me for this chore? And then people can say, I would give you 10 points. I would give you 20 points. And then someone basically just says, I did the chore, and then people give that person points. Like, there's no reason why just in the Slack people can't develop that practice on their own. But it just hasn't happened yet. And so I think an interesting question for me is, what can I realistically expect people to do on their own versus what requires software structure for people to be able to do? Is I think an interesting, like longer term and higher level kind of research question that I think tools like this can help us answer. Because I would say I think when I started, I assumed that people would be more like, I don't say, I assume that there'd be a little bit more like people figuring out ways to leverage the affordances. In practice, that doesn't really happen that much. Um, yeah, so those are some thoughts I have on that question. Okay, I want to quickly go over the heart system, and then I think we'll go into Q&A. But yeah, so the heart system is meant to be a longer term accountability structure. The kind of idea is that, 5 hearts is the baseline, and people gain and lose hearts in a variety of ways. And over time, we always return to the baseline, which is a way to really operationalize the idea of forgiveness. The idea is that over time, um, people return to kind of a social baseline. So if you lose a heart, every month you regain a quarter heart just automatically. And so if there's if you don't do your chores one month or there's some conflict, you maybe suffer a penalty. But then as long as you kind of return to acceptable behavior, over time that penalty is lost. I mean, it's forgotten and you return to 5 hearts. By the same token, if you do extra chores, you gain special karma. Over time that returns to the baseline. So the idea is that we're basically kind of operationalizing memory and forgiveness directly into the system, in a way that, obviously, like, I've only done a little bit of research on this from the Sage residents, but it does seem like people feel as though this actually quite meaningfully allows them to like let go of conflict, not have to remember things themselves, because there's a certain trust that the system will keep track of things for them. And that's something I was quite proud of. 2 things is you can give people karma, right? So I can be like, I'll give you say, I'll say for asking such good questions. And now we see, there's some good karma. People actually this feature ends up being used quite a bit. At Sage House, people do this pretty often. And so this is like another way to acknowledge behavior. If the chore system is meant to acknowledge like big tasks that people like wouldn't otherwise do, the karma system is a way to maybe acknowledge like smaller tasks that don't need all this definition. And so, the idea of multiple mechanisms that all kind of complement and like all kind of fill their niche means that the system as a whole ends up being like pretty comprehensive. As we have multiple systems that all kind of complement each other in like very sort of subtle ways. So that's that. And the last system is settling a dispute. This is like the big conflict resolution. We have to do a vote now, like type of thing where, you can actually give someone a challenge saying, hey, Steve, I thought that you were extremely hostile in this chat, and I think you should lose a heart. And I'm gonna do my thing, and then it's gonna go to a public vote. But the thing about the challenge, which I was proud of, was it's symmetric. So if I were to challenge someone and lose, then I would lose the heart. It is, you really want to prevent people from like griefing. I thought a lot about the security of these systems, and every system I would say is fairly secure, and that there's really no way to grief anyone that doesn't actually just harm you, the griefer. And so, this is actually designed for a pretty adversarial setting. I think in practice, it's only been deployed in very friendly settings. But the actual fundamental design is like pretty robust, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's perfect, and but I think it's like pretty decent. So anyway, that's the whole system. Let's go into Q&A. Yeah, Ariane, what you got?
I think Steve had a few comments that
Oh yeah,
haven't been
please.
addressed quite yet, and then I can go as well.
You see all my stuff in the chat that you just want to read it.
Let me I did not have the chat open. Let me pull it up right now because I was running the Slack. Okay, let's see what we got. Maybe add more chores to the wheel. Okay, yes, exactly right. So the priority system is definitely based on budget box. That's exactly what is under the hood. Um, yeah, it was basically a way to take that technique and just put it into practice in a new setting. And in my mind, kind of show off the technique and how it works. Is there tracking overall gifted points? No, as I said before, points only really exist in the like epoch of the month. And so once the month ends, the whole system turns over and we just go back to zero. The idea of points somehow being counted over a longer period of time is not something that has really occurred yet. And yeah, and I think to your point about Goodhart, I totally agree. I think the idea of having multiple different systems that all interact prevents having like a single number, which ends up collapsing. We end up with a system that's actually fairly dynamic, fairly socially embedded and fairly nuanced. So there's no, I think we've done a pretty good job of having the kind of symbolic system state like map pretty, I would say, accurately to like the house's social state without too much like negative, like people don't feel oppressed by the system. I think they feel as though it actually is quite empowering to them because all of the symbols end up feeling pretty accurate and legitimate in their minds. Not always. I think there's rough edges, but compared to other things that are out there, I think this does a pretty good job of like really legitimately embedding a social sphere into like a symbolic state. More questions, or I can just kind of respond to comments.
John has a question.
Yes, John.
Yeah, Daniel, thanks a lot. I appreciate the presentation. Two questions. One, when you were redistributing values on chores, was there had you thought about putting that to a vote, and if so, was there a reason you sort of let that sort of water level find itself over time? That's my first question. Second one is on a dispute resolution, when people are voting on that, is that anonymous or not in terms
Um,
of how they would come back and voice their opinion over a dispute?
Yeah, John, it's great. Great questions. I'll take them in opposite order. So as far as disputes, all the votes are anonymous. So if you go to the Jungle Gym channel, you'll see that every vote is just an emoji, but you don't see who the voters are. And a big thing that we talked about during the early design was what information should be public and what should be private. I think if something is too private, you can get people who have abusive behaviors. But if things are too public, then people might not be honest. And so, what is the balance between public and private in a system like this? And I think where we ended up was, you know, a challenge should be public. No one should have to respond to an anonymous challenge. Any kind of claim or assertion should be public, but like a vote or an opinion should generally be private. And that was where we ended up. So if I'm going to challenge you, John, then it would be public. You'd know that I challenged you, but everyone's votes would be private. That was the way we did it. As far as like what kind of deliberation there is, so the system itself encourages like just a kind of a text blurb of what the issue was, so that everyone in the Slack can at least read that. I would say in practice, I would want a more involved process. And if you go to this link, there's actually like a whole page about conflict resolution. And I really encourage people to use like a more involved process. I was really inspired by Frederick Laloux's book, Reinventing Organizations. The idea was, if there's a dispute, first talk to the person one-on-one, and then, if that doesn't work, then find a third party to help you mediate. The idea was, you only really get to a public vote like this once the other steps in the process have not worked out. So the idea was not you just like wake up and you're in a bad mood and you challenge someone. The reason why the punishment was symmetric was to actually discourage people from griefing the system. And so ideally, by the time you've gotten to this point, the issue is actually fairly well understood by the participants. That was the idea. To answer your second question, so the reason why the prioritization system is the way that it is was because number one, I really wanted to minimize the reliance on in-person synchronous meetings. I thought that, like having 10 people in a meeting talking about whether this should be worth 5 points or 8 points, just seemed like the worst. It just seemed like a nightmare. I've been in a lot of co-op meetings, and there's so much bike shedding and like minutia. It just seemed like that would just be an experience that no one would be happy with. And so I thought, how can we do something very different? So the idea of a, kind of asynchronous collaborative process. And I think in my mind, I don't think we've achieved this in practice, but in my mind, the ideal would be you would not even be really going to set priorities. It wouldn't really be something that you'd have to make an effort to do. It would be something that would emerge naturally. Say for example, you're like, I'm, going about my life, and I'm like, I realize, I'm in the house. I realize, you know what? I've been noticing that the upstairs deck is pretty dirty, right? So there's a real world trigger. I feel as though the deck is dirty. I feel like the deck is consistently dirty, right? So by the time you even enter into this flow, you already have a task and a direction that you want to fix, right? So you're not coming in here in the abstract trying to assign values in the abstract. You are responding to a real world stressor that you've experienced. I think the deck is dirty. It's like, I think the deck is dirty, so I want to prioritize cleaning the deck. And so by the time we even arrive at this flow, let's say I think that I want, whatever it was, like, let's say that, you know, share something positive. I already, by the time I enter this flow, know what these things are. So the only question that I need to answer now is, if I want the deck to be cleaner, what am I willing to have be less clean, right? What am I willing to trade off? And so my hope is that by structuring the decision in this way, people are basically halfway to the finish line by the time they even start the process. And we avoid these like very circuitous abstract discussions about value in a very disembodied way. That was the goal. I don't think we've quite reached that in practice, but I think we're like on that road. So that was the reason why I did it that way. Does that answer your
Okay.
question?
Yeah, that does. And I think that's brilliant, actually. Thanks.
I appreciate that, John. Eliana, Eliana, what you got?
Forgot to unmute myself. Couple things. I'm a little confused on how the karma like reintegrates into the heart system. I believe you mentioned it, but I must have like glossed over it in my attention, and I apologize if so. Um,
Yeah,
and
so it's a great
then,
question.
yeah.
Yeah. Your second question?
Second was just more of just a comment. Having everything in one channel, I mean, I just sent the little bounty message. Um, But I think having that be in the same channel with the log of everything else, like I see that there's two messages of karma, like any action gets pumped, so that's going to get lost in the feed like really quickly. So I was curious if there's functionality to have this be over multiple channels, or if this is just contained at the jungle gym, or what the logistics of that are.
Great question. So actually, you can have multiple channels. So I'm going to very briefly show you. I'm actually not going to show you Sage House because I think that would be a privacy violation. But
Yeah, no worries.
every app you can basically configure to its own channel. So I did this at first because I wanted to keep it simple, but we could very easily have a chores channel and a hearts channel, and it really depends on what people want. So the channel is something you can configure. We thought, because we just want there to be one place for people to pay attention to, we're going to put everything in one channel, but we could have separate channels if we wanted to. The first question. Second question. So the way that karma works, going back to what I said before about wanting the thing to be quite robust. So under the hood, um, basically what it does is, at the end of the month, the karma all gets added up, but not just added up in a simple way. Basically, uh, the amount of karma, the amount that your karma is worth as a giver is divided by how many karma you've given out. So if I've given out 10 pieces of karma, then every one of my karma is worth 0.1. And then basically we add up how much karma someone has received, and then we take the top three. And the idea is that if two people are just kind of spamming each other karma, then it's going to end up being worth 1 for each person, if that makes sense. And so the idea was to basically avoid, make it harder for people to cheat the system. by doing it that way. And so if I give a lot of people karma, my karma is worth relatively little. If I only give one person karma, that karma is worth a lot. Initially, I actually had I used the budget box algorithm also for karma. So it was more of a page rank system, but that ended up not working because I didn't want giving karma to actually take away the karma that you had. And if you use the page rank budget box algorithm, then you end up losing your own karma as a giver. And that ended up not being the right model. So I ended up going for something a bit simpler, which is just like adding up people's like average karma. That's how it works. Um, yeah, and I think that in practice it ends up the people who get the karma are the people who receive the most karma, with a little bit of that regularizing to prevent people from cheating.
So, but then it was mentioned that the top 3 of the karma is selected, and then what is there an incentive to that or something with the heart system? Or I still am confused as to how it integrates with the heart system.
You get a bonus heart if you are the karma if you get the karma. Yeah, so you get like a whole extra heart. So the way it works is if you do 100% of your chores, you get an extra half heart. If you get karma, you get an extra bonus heart. And if you don't do chores, you lose a quarter heart for every 5 points that you're short. And if you lose a dispute, you like lose how many hearts do you lose? So that's kind of the current tuning. I'm actually exploring making it possible for communities to basically override those parameters and kind of configure their own like rates. I haven't done it yet because I had to like this is an opinionated product, not a user configurable product. I think that I'm gonna move away from that slowly, but it's just like a feature I haven't gone to yet. Any more questions? I know we're almost at time.
Hey, Daniel. Yeah, I've got a question about scaling. Obviously, the point system and hearts and everything will work for as many people as you want, but the feed doesn't really scale, right? Because already in the time that we've been going through this in this hour, all we can see is what we've done on the call. So, how do you think about scaling in the context of this?
Yeah, Richard, it's such a great question. I would say that so I say, I think Sage House is 10 people. We have 10 people active here. I would say that I would wait. I would say wait and see. I think in this call, this is maybe not indicative of normal use because we're all like here, we're experimenting, we're trying stuff out, we're demoing. So I don't think this level of activity is indicative of organic use. I think that it's like a little bit artificial. Um, I would say that I would say probably at 50 people, I would say between 40 and 50, I would expect it to become a little bit unwieldy. But until then, I don't expect too much of an issue. I think that most things don't really require engagement. I think that if people need upvotes, I think they can basically ask others to like upvote them. I think that kind of scanning the list and like giving thumbs ups is not such a involved process. So I think that it's a great question, but I would say I would not expect problems to emerge in organic use until like the 40 or 50 person mark. I think that if we end up in communities of 100 people plus, I think figuring out I think at that point we might want to think about what to do about that, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, yeah. When I was guessing your house, there's probably fewer than the 15 that we've got on this channel.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wonder how would you think about scaling it in larger communities? Because obviously the points mechanism works well, but it seems to me that it's really like sort of like the ongoing feed, which is the problem. And you see the same in group chats, right? Like once you've got too many people in a group chat, it becomes difficult. So, I mean, do you have anything sort of in the back of your head?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have thought about allowing people to define like almost like suites or floors. Imagine that like this is the first floor, second floor. So within the app, I think initially the idea was that the Slack is one unified community. But I could imagine you could have like, we're gonna define, squad A, which is these 10 people, squad B, which is this 10 people. And so we're gonna actually just kind of subdivide a bit, and each one of those could have its own channel. Like squad A will have channel 1, squad B will have channel 2. Maybe even it'll have its own chores and points pool. So I can imagine basically just allowing for an installation to be subdivided or even just keyed on like some arbitrary sort of slug or to allow for a subdivision. I think that would be the way to do it that would require the least new code. But I think, yeah, that's basically as far as I've gotten with it. I would kind of wait to see what emerged and kind of engineer around that.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Kind of building on that, if we've got time, I was curious if the upvotes, do they scale with the number of active users, or is it just
yes,
set?
so
Okay.
they definitely do. I can even show you, like, if you go to the code base, there's a configuration. Everything is expressed as a percentage of the users. So I think, like, 40%, 70%. Yeah, so generally everything scales with the size of the house. Yeah. The only thing that doesn't is if something is more than 10 points, you need 2 upvotes, and that is hard coded. So that the number of upvotes for a chore doesn't scale. The idea was you need 1 person to verify you. Everything else scales as a percentage of the residents.
I'm clearly already having way too much fun with this. Thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, I'm really excited and uh, encourage you all to keep playing with it and
Yeah.
earn your. Oh my gosh, my computer is like freaking out.
I mean, one
But
thing else, yeah, sorry, Val, I want to say something.
yeah, no, just earn your points and have fun doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I say is, like, this is here for us to use. I think that the idea was that people in the Metagov community can use this tool to basically help guide and enhance the community itself, right? So this is your tool to make the Metagov community the community that you want it to be. So I would welcome everyone to participate and use it and, like, help grow this community and make it even richer than it is today.
Yay. Cool. Well, thanks everyone so much, and thank you, Daniel. Let's unmute, give Daniel a big round of applause. Such a cool project. Thanks for sharing it with us. Yay. And have a great rest of your day, everyone. Propose some seminars. I'll add that to the chore wheel, maybe. Let's
And
do this
community
again
calls.
next
What are we
week.
doing? I got to talk to you. Community call versus seminar thing. Okay.
All right.
All
Message
right.
me. Okay,
Message.
bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.